Hey everybody, it's Nick here for Grayscale Gorilla. I am the Gorilla, and today we're going to do another Cinema 4D tutorial. This one's based on a piece by Seagull Fly, I think is their Seagull's Fly is their name. Let's go ahead and check out what we're trying to build today, and then we'll hop into Cinema and start playing around. So somebody posted this on the Facebook page, and I thought it was a pretty cool spot with all these kind of marble eyeballs falling down in a shape to kind of fill up the number 5 here. And I thought that was a pretty fun way to kind of play around a little bit with physics and also some texturing. So we're going to texture this eyeball in Cinema as well. And as always, we're going to try to match the lighting and make the lighting as close as we can as well. So hopefully it'll be a fun one. I think it will. Let's head on into Cinema and start making this thing. Now the concepts of this aren't too different than a lot of tutorials. It's a lot of dynamics tags, setting up the shapes for the dynamics tags. We're going to have an emitter, and we're going to set all this thing up real basic, and then we're going to get into the lighting and the texturing. So first thing, obviously, we need a sphere. We're going to shrink this dude way down, maybe something like 10 centimeters or so. And we're going to emit these spheres using an emitter in the particle system. So you go to Simulation, Particle Emitter, and you make the sphere a child of the emitter. Come into the emitter and say Show Objects, and then you hit play. So now we have a basic emitter set up here. And what we want to do is add dynamics to our sphere. Excuse me. So what we're going to do is go to our sphere and go to our tags menu here and grab the, actually what we're going to do is we're going to add it from our simulations menu up here. Go to Simulations, Dynamics, and Create Rigid Body. And you're going to see now all these spheres kind of fall out of the emitter and fall down to the ground. They're dynamic. And this is going to be the little portal where the eyeballs get shoved into the 5. So there's the basics of it. Let's get the 5 going. Let's pause this and go back to 0. And let's use a MoGraph MoText object to make the 5. Now, any letter or number will work for this. We're going to use 5 because that's what they used for the tutorial. But anything that has a continuous shape, I'm thinking maybe a 2 might work. 5 just happens to work really well because the way it's shaped. And you can see it kind of goes over and down and around. Now, the problem I had was finding the right font. If you look at their finished font here, it's this really kind of single space or single shape 5 here. And I didn't give it too much thought. I bet if I looked around a little bit more I could find this exact font, but I found one that's pretty close that most of you probably have, and it's Gill Sans. So go on into your font and find Gill Sans in your fonts, and let's try regular for now. And you can see now regular might work, but it's more of a square single shape. It's not perfect, but it's close. Let's try the bold one and see how that goes. That might work even better. You can see it's really nice and fat. There's not a lot of catch on the bottom of this 5. You could see with the font that we had, which I think was maybe Helvetica or something. You can see something like this is a cool shape, but we have this big kind of catch here where the spheres would get trapped, and then it would have to go up and over and all the way around to here. So using something like Gill Sans is going to give us a little bit better kind of shape for our spheres. So let's go ahead and use it. And all we have to do is turn this into a dynamic shape. So what we're going to do is we're going to position this emitter inside of the 5. We're going to blast out some spheres so they fall through and down. And let's go ahead and do that now. If you go select your MoText and go to Simulation, Dynamics, Create Collider, this is going to make it a collider. Now, you can't just make it a normal collider. You have to come into the Collision tab on the tag and turn the shape into a static mesh. And this is going to allow us to put objects inside of this mesh. It allows us to calculate not only the outside dynamics, but the inside ones as well. So with that set up, let's take our emitter and let's position it inside the top of the 5. So let's go to like an all 4 view here and see if we can't zoom in a little bit and position this emitter right on the tip of the 5. And so we do have to rotate it. So let's go ahead and rotate around 90 degrees here. There we go. Oh, almost. I'm holding shift to keep it constrained to 5 degrees. So that's good. Let's use this side view. Let's jump in and kind of position it. And what we have to do is shrink the emitter size. So in the emitter itself, they have an emitter tab. We could shrink the width of it and the height. So we just want a little sliver to kind of pop through. So let's go ahead and add that there. Now let's go to our main view here and position it so it's right on the tip of the 5. And let's turn around and maybe add a little bit more width and height. Now let's make the 5 a little bit thicker so it can handle a few more spheres. So let's just make it more like a square. I think that'll be perfect. And then let's grab our emitter, reposition it in the center, and adjust our size on our emitter so it's kind of almost as big as our as the tip of that 5 there. There we go. All right, now here's the next step is to make this MoTeX disappear. While we do want it to calculate dynamics, we don't want it to be visible because you're not going to see anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn off the traffic lights. What I do is I hold down Alt or Option on your keyboard, and I click twice on these traffic lights, and they both turn to red. What this means is it's still in the scene, it's still calculating, but it's not visible in the scene when we're kind of dynamically looking at the scene, and it's also not in the scene when we hit render. And that's what we want. So now if we hit play, you're going to see these spheres kind of start to spit out here into the 5 and kind of fall around. You can see we have a problem already, but that's okay. That's easy to fix. We just need to shrink it a little bit. So let's go ahead and shrink our spheres quite a bit. And you can see now we got the basic animation going from this spot. So let's extend our timeline to something like 300 frames, because this is going to allow us to kind of see a lot more of what's going on. Now you can see right there at frame about 150, I think it is, the spheres stop emitting from the emitter. So we can come up to the emitter, and you can see in the emitter settings, we have a setting here, right here, called Stop Emission 150 frames. Let's crank that up to something like 350 frames or so. And you can see now the spheres are just going to continuously come out through the whole scene. Another thing you'll see is we could probably add a lot more spheres to the scene. And that we can handle in the birth rate editor and birth rate renderer. And I usually try to keep these the same because I want my editor to represent what happens when I hit render. See what happens there? And if you don't do that, then you're going to have a mismatch between what you see in this editor view and when you hit render. So I'm going to knock both of these up to like 20, go back to 0, and see now it looks like we're doing okay. And it's going to spit out a lot more particles and fill up that number a lot quicker. And you can see we may even see it almost all rendered. Look at that. That's pretty close to what we want. Now, if we look at the original, you can see we have a long way to go to light it and texture it and do all this stuff. One thing you'll notice too is that the sizes of the spheres are different. And that we can handle pretty quickly by going into the emitter and then adding a random effector to the emitter. So if with the emitter selected, come on up to MoGraph, effector, and random. And with random turned on, you can actually go to, nope, I take that back. I've done this before, and this doesn't work. And the reason this doesn't work, here, let me show you. So let's go select the random effector. Let's go to scale, and let's turn on uniform scale, and let's crank up the scale. You can see nothing happens. And I've tried this before, and it didn't work. And let me just kind of try to explain why it doesn't work. It doesn't work because the emitter object is not part of the MoGraph tools. set. It's separate from the MoGraph tool set. Now, there's probably a way to add this to MoGraph, and usually you use something like the fracture object. Now, if we added a fracture object, and then in the effectors in the fracture object added a random effector, this might work. This might work. Let's see if we can get this going. You can see it is affecting the clones. It looks like we just have to come into the fracture and go to object, and it go explode segments, and that looked like it worked. See, now we have different size spheres, way too different size spheres. So let's go to the parameter in our random. Let's hit pause here. You can see we have all these clones going crazy now. But if we go back to our random effector and go to our parameter and turn down that random amount, we're going to get a lot. We're going to get a lot closer to what we want. So that's one way to do it. That is not the way I did it. You can see there's a lot of steps going on, but the fracture object is always a good way to get other things into the MoGraph system so that you could use the effectors. So if we don't do that and we just delete the emitter and we delete the random effector, the way I did it was actually in the emitter settings itself, there's this, an option for scale. And if you just turn up the variation for scale to something like 50%, that's a lot more simple, isn't it? And now you can see we have different size spheres kind of filling up the type. Okay, so it's looking pretty good. One thing is we are filling up the 5 so quickly that we can actually probably shut this render off right around there, right around when we see it getting full. So something like, I'm seeing like 240 frames or so. We can actually, let's see, 250, let's say. At 250 frames, it's going to stop emitting spheres. And once it does, it's going to kind of settle in, and then hopefully that'll be the end of our animation, right? So as always, there's always a lot of tweaking we could do. I even saw a guy got flung out of the system here. Let's see where that is. Yeah, see that? All right, that may be because the emitter isn't all the way inside of our MoTeX. So let's just move it in just a little bit and make sure that nothing pops out. And if things continue to pop out, let me talk about a couple ways to solve some problems. This looks like a pretty stable render so far and a pretty stable system. If you start having problems with things jumping out of your system or going through walls, one thing you could do is go to your dynamic settings, actually your big project settings on Command D, go to Command D, and then go to Dynamics. And inside Dynamics, you're going to see a bunch of different tabs here. If you go to Expert, you could turn up your steps per frame to something like double, maybe 10. And then you're going to get a more accurate calculation. The render time will slow down a little bit. And I should say not the render time, but the calculation time. You can see it's not a huge hit, but it's going to be a lot more accurate and not allow spheres to fall through the cracks, I guess. Another thing you may see, and let's see if we have this on our system. Let's go ahead down to the bottom. And you can see once these things start settling down, you might see them start to jump around. Right now I don't see anything too jumpy in this system. But you may have flickering depending on the size of your spheres. If we crank this way down and we have a lot smaller spheres, you may have kind of a jittery effect on some of these spheres down at the bottom. If you do, this is something new I finally figured out, and I'm going to use it a lot more often. If you go into the sphere settings, you can go to force. And in force is linear dampening and angular dampening. Or damping, it looks like. I was saying dampening in my head the whole time. But linear damping and angular damping, what that's going to do is settle the clones down earlier. And allow them to not jump around and be so fidgety. I have a sense it kind of gives them a little bit of resistance to movement, just enough so that they don't kind of jump around the screen like this. So if you're having those issues, go ahead and turn up your linear dampening just a little bit, see if that helps. Anyway, it looks like we have a pretty stable system right now. So let's start talking about texturing the eyeballs, get lighting going, get the backdrop in here, and then talk about maybe some of the camera angles we could add. Excuse me. So let's get these eyeballs textured. So let's go ahead and add a new material. Jump this up into the sphere. Open up the material settings, and we're going to go to color, and we're going to add a gradient. In the gradient, we're going to go to 2DV, and this is going to allow us to make a gradient all the way through a sphere. So if we zoom in, you can see it's kind of black to white all the way through. Now, what we actually want to do is make most of it white. So let's go ahead and make that white all the way up front to here. You can see now we almost have this eyeball shape already. We have all the way to white and then a little bit of black. So we'll leave the black here. But the black is going to back out to a color. So we could pick something like a bluish green color, kind of an eyeball color. Or, you know, you can match whatever color eyes you have. Mine are kind of hazily, greeny blue. So maybe we'll make Nick eyes for this one. And I'm just offsetting the color just a bit, just so it's a little bit more random. And, you know, from here you could just play around with the gradient and try to get a good eye shape going. Maybe pull up a reference of an eyeball or check out their reference in their spheres here. But trying to get this close. And you can see now, so we have mostly white, and then we have a little bit of the outer part of the eye colored, and then we have our kind of iris or whatever they call that dude inside. So there's our eyeballs, and these are all going to come spinning out of our system. And there's a few more things we could do to make this eyeball a lot more realistic. And one of them is add the kind of texturing to the eyeball. Man, I wish I knew what that was. It's not the cornea, that's the inside. The iris and, well, there's a name for that dude right there. I'm sure you guys will let me know. But this bluish part, you can add those kind of details. And what I'm going to use to do that is the diffusion channel. And the diffusion channel allows me to add things like noise and apply it to diffuse the color and the brightness of the other part of the texture. While that's not right, that's kind of a disease right there. I think those eyeballs need to get checked up. All we really want to do is add noise to only the blue part. And the way we're going to do that is with a layer shader. So I already made a noise shader. If I come in and I make it a layer shader instead, what the layer shader does is allow me to go into the layer shader and look at more than one shader at a time and allow me to multiply and kind of blend them together. So you can see we already have a noise shader, but what we want is our noise shader to only be applied to the blue section. So I'm going to cheat a little and come up to our color channel and copy. If we go into the gradient, I can go to gradient and copy that gradient. So now if we go into our diffusion and we add a go into our layer, we could add a new shader. We could add a new gradient shader, go into it and set it up just like we did the other one, 2DV, and then we could paste into the gradient. And now what we have is the same gradient in our color and our diffusion. And we're going to use that to tell the noise to only apply noise to the outside of the eye there. So let's go back into the layer shader. And what we're going to do is we're going to make this, instead of white and black, we're going to make it, or white and blue and black, we're going to make it only white and black. And what it's going to say is where it's white, do not apply the noise. Where it's black, do apply the noise. And where it's white, do not apply the noise. So you can see on our eyeball, we don't want noise on the white. We do want noise on the blue and none in the middle. So what we could do is first of all make the inside white and then make all of this stuff black. So right where we had our color, make it black. And now it's going to use this map to apply the diffusion. Well, almost. Let's back out of our gradient and look that what really is going on here is the gradient shader is overriding our noise shader. And that's because there's no blending mode. Now we could turn it down and we could fade between them. But what we can actually do is make this a blending mode. And the one I think will work is, if I remember right, screen. And that looks like it worked. So what screen did was screen only the white pixels down through to the bottom, but leave the black ones and kind of make the black ones disappear. And you can see now we have this normal kind of nothing here, and then only noise on the blue part, and then nothing in the middle. And that's closer to what we want, but let's zoom in and look at the noise pattern that we're getting. And you can see it's not very interesting. It's just kind of blobby, basic noise. So if we go into our noise, what we could do is start to play with the scale and shrink it in a little bit, maybe stretch out the Y. And now we're getting longer and longer kind of lines. And you can see it's still not mapping right. And I think this is actually a space issue. If we just do a normal texture, it's going to be flat. But if we use UV2D, it's going to map more like this. You can see now we have this radial kind of pattern on our eyeball. And this is how we're trying to emulate that look of the eyeball. Now, let's see how close we can get. With a lot more work, I'm sure we can get a lot closer, but this is the basic idea. We can kind of tweak around with that. We're never really that close on the eyeball, and that's something to keep in mind, is you can get away with a lot from out here. And that is looking pretty good. Let's make our eyeball a little bit brighter, so maybe we could see the diffusion a little bit better. And it's also, the diffusion is making it so dark that we could probably play around a little bit, make it a little bit brighter blue, and hit the render there. That looks pretty good. So other than that, we're going to add some reflection. Let's go ahead and add reflection. Add a Fresnel shader to the reflection and turn it way down. So something like 9% on the main brightness and 30 or so on that. And now this is going to not only reflect all the eyeballs, but it's going to reflect the lighting and all that other stuff. So let's leave the texture as it is for now, and maybe come back to it if we need to tweak it after we start lighting. Because once you get lights in there, your textures always react differently once there's lights. And they're always playing off each other. So this is a good basic one. One other thing I want to do is go into the emitter and give the rotation a variation a tweak. Well, it looks like it's already set to 100%. I guess we're all set with rotation. I just want to make sure that the eyeballs have the ability to see the outside. And it looks like we have a pretty good randomness on the eyeballs. So that looks pretty good. All right, let's light this dude. Let's get a background in. For the backdrop, I'm going to use a studio that comes with the Grayscale Gorilla, the Light Kit Pro. And if you have the Light Kit Pro, you can make this, or you just go into studios and come down here, and you could use something like the L Studio. And you can see if you zoom out of the L Studio, it's just a basic sweep. It's pretty big by default for some larger objects. We could probably shrink it down, get a lot more realistic kind of feel for it. But if you want to make your own, you could just make this with a sweep. Or with a, let's see, a extrude NURBS and a spline. You could just make that shape. And you have your backdrop here. So this is our kind of basic camera angle here. And we're going to use a softbox to light it. So we can come in and add a new softbox. And again, let's zoom out and see how it's looking. The softbox is a little large by default as well for this object. So we can come into the softbox controls. And first of all, bring in the distance quite a lot. I want to kind of make it a lot closer. And maybe even shrink the scale and the overall kind of width and height, just so it's not so large. And I'm doing all this based on their render. I do like looking at renders and trying to figure out and guess how they lit their scene. And one good way to figure out how people light their scenes is to look for two things. One is if it's reflective object, you get a big bonus extra hint, because reflective objects are going to reflect the light source in the object. You can see here with the spheres have this bright corner on them, which means there's probably a big softbox right up over here. Another giveaway are shadows. And this shadow, this long shadow right here, let me get out of the way, is again another hint that there's a light source almost directly to the side casting a shadow down. And in fact, when we get close-ups like this, you could really start to see there's a softbox there, and you can see exactly how things are being made. So there's a softbox there. So let's go ahead and start with that. Let's move the softbox around kind of to the side and up. And if we zoom in and over, that is about the right position. That feels pretty good. Maybe a little bit higher. And let's do a quick render and see what we got. So let's zoom in, do a quick render, and you can see we do have the shadow coming over, and we do have the highlight from the softbox, maybe a little bit larger from the softbox. We could do that. And maybe even a little closer. Softboxes always work better when they're a little bit closer to the camera or closer to your object. We're getting a weird shadow here, so maybe we'll just back it off just a little bit. That's nice though. That's got a good feel to it. And the shadow's almost just right. I'm going to shrink the width a little bit to make this shadow a little sharper. So remember, the larger the light source, the softer the shadow. So if we shrink our width and do a render, you're going to see we're going to have a more narrow shadow here. If we make it wider, you're going to see we have a more diffuse kind of soft shadow. But I like the idea that we have this kind of long trailing shadow from our object. So let's jump back around and do a quick another render here. So we have our reflections going, we have our eyeballs going, but you can see it's still a little bit too dark. Only this one light source is obviously not enough. So one thing we could do is just turn up the light source. So this is a more like 150. This has a better feel. It's a lot more bright. It's lighting the back wall a little bit here, but it's still not a full, fully lit scene like this guy is here. So if we come here, you can see. Now, one thing you can look at is what are the other light sources that are in the scene you're trying to recreate. And in this case, you can see there's a big heavy blue tint to the scene, and there's a lot of overall kind of global lighting going on. And so there's a few things you could do. You could use global illumination and build a little room and have it bounce around. That's one way, but global illumination and animation can get really tricky. You get a lot of problems with flickering, and all these things are solvable, but usually it means at the expense of render time. So the render times usually go way up. We want to keep this fast because we're already at 300 frames, right? So what I built as part of the Lightkit Pro is a sky dome, and we're going to use the linear skylight and add that to the scene and hit render. And you can see already, just with the skylight, we're filling in a lot of the details, we're filling in the shadows, and we're making it a brighter scene overall. And in fact, it's got this blue tint by default that's going to work really well for this scene. So already, what we could probably do is turn up the linear skylight a little bit and make that fill a little bit brighter. That's looking pretty good. Not so bad. So another thing we need to keep in mind is that we may have to make this a little bit larger. So let's go to the light dome size and play around with it. Let's move it up a little bit, and maybe a little bit more. And we're getting there. We're getting there. Let's go back up. Now I'm sick of kind of zooming out and zooming back in. So this is usually where I grab a camera and I turn on the camera and I position the camera exactly how I want it. So I'm going to kind of make our main render here, something like this. And this is going to be our basic render. And then when we turn off the camera, it's going to come out, and I can now play around with different render settings and things like that. So let's see if we can fix our shadowing. So one thing we're looking at is the overall brightness of the scene is nice, but it's still almost too bright in some of these shadows. One thing we could do is turn up the shadow density in our skylight. This is going to give us kind of an ambient occlusion look to our render, and that's helping quite a bit right there. And that allows us probably to turn up the brightness even more and to start to get this going. One thing we are want to play with also is the sweep. You can see we're starting to get lines and stuff in the sweep. So we can actually maybe even scale this up and make the sweep a little bit more gradual, or maybe even shrink it down and make it less gradual. But we're just trying to smooth this out so our lighting gets a little bit smoother. Another thing it might be is the lighting bias. Now, lighting bias or the shadow map resolution are two things that allow us to calculate shadows kind of quickly. And if we turn this way down, you're going to see we're getting this kind of sharp line on the back sweep. And if we turn this more up, it's going to smooth that out a lot more and give us a little more detail in our shadows and make our overall shadows a lot sharper when they come from the skylight. So this is approaching the way we want it to look. Maybe a little bit less blue in our skylight. And, you know, we're at the tweaking point now where just little 2% changes kind of help. It's a little bit bright overall, so maybe we'll turn down the skylight overall. And we'll go to the softbox and maybe turn that down a little bit. Just kind of get the overall brightness dialed in. And that's looking a lot better already. Maybe a little bit less here. And again, we're tweaking. There's no right numbers for this. It's all about changing 2, 3, 4, 5, 10% of the object until it looks right. And that looks pretty close. Maybe it's still a little bit dark in the shadows, so we could turn that down quite a bit. And let's go ahead and call that good. All right, so let's go back to frame 0, hit play. And we're starting to get our lighting together. We have our skylight going on, and we have our objects coming out. We have all the stuff happening. One thing is there's kind of a collider moment here, so maybe we shrink our overall sphere just a little bit to something like 4. And that's going to maybe give us a little bit more room for these spheres to kind of bounce around. I have a feeling, though, that we're going to have to either turn up our overall amount of spheres. You can see it quit too early. So let's make this 4.6. And again, we're just in dial mode where we're playing around and trying to get things working the way we want them to. When you have a problem, you got to start making little tweaks that will help you kind of finish that. Now we're almost there, but you can see it's not filling all the way now because I made the sphere a little bit smaller. So instead, let's add more spheres. Let's go 23 spheres in per second there, and that might be right. It looks a little fast. One thing we can also do is speed up the spheres coming out so they kind of get forced into the bottom. That may be a little fast. But again, we're all in tweak mode right now. Let's see how this fills up by the time we get to 250 to see if this fills up the whole 5 in the right way and make it look good. That looks pretty good. There it is. Nice. All right. Excuse me. So from here, here's what I did from here. Here's the final scene. If you look at what they have their main scene. We still have a lot of comping to do and some other fun stuff, but they have their main kind of camera view here, but they're actually editing between a lot of different camera views. They have this nice little intro that you can make as well if you want, just by animating a few spheres around like that. That's a lot of keyframes in there, but it's pretty simple once you get the rotation and stuff going on. And then all the stuff comes out. I should say this isn't simple. This animation is actually really well done. You can see it's real snappy and has a lot of character for just a sphere looking around. So I would encourage you guys to play around with that, just using keyframes and curves in the timeline in Cinema. You know, I always say at the end of all these tutorials, see if you could push it a little further or try something else. You already have this eyeball model at the end, so why not pull it out and see if you could add a little bit more detail in the eyeball model and get these to animate around. But we're talking about this part here. You can see what they have are all these cool camera angles. They have this from below camera angle, this side angle, and then they finally kind of finish up with this angle. This one we have, right? But we have to make all these other ones. So let's go ahead with our camera and duplicate our camera and make a second camera angle. So we can come in here and kind of rotate around and get this kind of top-down angle. And remember, you could always play around with things like the focal length. You can make a more of a wide-angle lens here. Let's see if that works. That's a little too wide, so maybe something like 30. And now we could play around like this. Maybe that's an angle right there as it's filling up. It's kind of coming down and falling around like that. Cool. So let's say that's an angle. Let's duplicate the camera again and make this kind of bottom angle. So something like this. There we go. So play around with some different camera angles. And I think this looks really cool. I think that'll be a nice render there. We have some nice shadows. One thing I am missing in this scene is some ambient occlusion, I think. If we come in and we go to Effect, Ambient Occlusion, you're going to see we got a lot more darker areas in the spheres. I think this will help out a lot. Now, it's a little dark for me, so let's go to Color and make this more of like a middle gray. Just add a little bit of shadowing. It's not a heavy thing, but it is going to give us a little bit more detail in our shadows. One last thing I'm seeing is that some of these spheres are actually falling through the ground. So if I go turn off my cameras, look through the bottom, you can see we have a few spheres right there, just barely sticking through the bottom. So what we could do is we could grab our studio and grab our move tool and just move it down. And we just make sure none of these spheres kind of hit the ground. We don't want that happening. Much better. So let's go back through. Here's our main render. Boom. Maybe some things we could do with lighting still. Maybe turn up our overall linear skylight to give it a little bit more brightness, a little bit more blue. Maybe we'll pull a little bit more blue back into the system here. That's looking pretty good. And actually, let's add a little bit of warmth to our softbox, just so we have a nice kind of transition between the warmth of the softbox and the coolness of the skylight. That's looking pretty good, pretty good. So from here, here's what I did. We have this, we have it set up. So let's go ahead and save our scene. Always a good idea. Maybe I should have saved before. But now we have, let's see. Where's my little thing here? We got eyeballs. Good. And let's make a new folder called eyeballs tutorial. Okay, we're going to save eyeball 1 in here. Good. Excuse me. So we have three camera angles, and for the render I did, I actually had four or five actual camera angles, and I think one of them was the beginning one, so we can make that as well. So let's duplicate that, and the first scene, or the first camera, is actually up here, and it's looking kind of, it's more of a zoom in, and it's more of like a 50 millimeter or something like that, and it's of the first spheres coming out right there, just like that. You can see it coming through. So this is that first camera angle I want, kind of sticking, starting off the animation. So now we have all of our cameras. We have our start, we have our close-up 1, and our close-up 2, and then our main camera. So here's how I rendered it. What I did, I went to the render settings, I went to output, I made it 1280 by 720, made it HD, and then I went to current frame, I said all frames. And for the main camera, I want it to render all the frames. And actually, maybe not. Maybe for the main camera, I only want it to render, let's see, it's going somewhere around here, maybe 120 to 300, right? And that's because I can look and know, well, I only want this camera for the end part of the scene. I only want this camera for somewhere around the middle. And what's going to help us decide what renders we want is to bake our particles. So if we just go to our scene settings, we go Command D, we go to our document settings, and we can go to Dynamics, and then we can go to Cache, and we could say Bake. Boom. And it's going to calculate all of those particles going through the system and colliding and being dynamic and all that stuff. And when it's finished, we have a baked system, which means we can now scrub the timeline back and forth, and all of our particles are reacting without having to be calculated. And this is cool because now we can say, okay, from here, okay, 140 to the end is what I want the main camera. In the close-up 2, all the action is happening, I think, right here. So let's say frame, 26 to 100, and always add a few extra ones, especially when you're doing a batch render like we're about to do. Always do a few extras. We also have a close-up here. So we could say this is a cool shot from 60 to 180, or when it gets all full, something like that. And then our start is we only need it from 0 to 100, right? Excuse me again. So write all that down, and then we're going to set up our batch render. So we're going to save eyeball 1, and we're going to save this as we're going to go save as, and then we're going to say eyeball main. Done, right? In our render settings, we're going to go from 120 to 300. Okay? And then we're going to go to the render queue. Now, the render queue you can find in window here. In the render queue, you can see I've already rendered all this other stuff for when I did the basic, when I did the preview for the tutorial. That was all set up. But we're going to reset all this up now. What we do is in the render queue, we're going to add file, add current scene, eyeball main. You can see that's the current scene. Add current scene, and it says, do you want to save changes? I say yep, and it's going to save that scene as a part of the render queue right there. Now what we can do is, if we just wanted to render different cameras, what we could do is go ahead and duplicate this, and we could do that by let's see, you could drag this out. Yeah, there we go. Command drag it out, go into the other settings here, and then we can go down into all the settings. Let's turn it on. And it's not showing me stuff down here. There it is. We could just change the camera to another camera. So now we have main camera, start camera, and we can go all the way down through here. And the only problem is we can't do this because we have different render settings for each frame. So for example, we don't want 0 to 300 rendered on each camera. If we did, we'd be done. Because all we have to do is duplicate this again and pick each different camera. Come down, go to close-up 1, come down, go to close-up 2, come down, there we go, and go to, that's it. Start, close-up 1, close-up 2, main, done, right? So if we delete that last one, if we were to hit render right now, it would render this scene frames 120 through 300 on every camera. The only problem is we want different frames rendered on different cameras. And the only way I know how to do that is to make different scene files. Now, there's probably a better way for this. I'm hoping somebody actually tells me that, Nick, you're doing it all wrong. You can actually use the same scene file with different frame numbers. But I can't seem to find it. Maybe it just has to do with making a new render setting and then using a different render setting and saving it. That could be the case. What I did was I just saved this as a different scene file, something like eyeball close-up, right? So now if I go to eyeball close-up, I go to eyeball close-up 1. I can go into render settings and change the output from frame 0 to frame 150, let's say. Go back to the render queue and add this scene. So add current scene, yes. And I want to make sure this current scene is in camera 1, right? Close-up camera 1. And I did that. So essentially, I ended up with 4 different scene files, 4 different things in the render queue. And then when I was ready, I went to jobs and hit start rendering, and it started to render. Now, you do have to tell it where to render. You set it all up, and you let it go. And then you come back hours later, and all of your cameras are rendered, all your scenes are rendered, it's all set up, ready to go. This is hugely useful for me, and I actually want to learn more about it. I have a feeling, just going through this tutorial, that this is the secret to not having to use different scene files. But again, I'm always learning as I go, and if somebody has a good answer for that, that'd be awesome. Anyway. That's the end of the cinema part. Basically, you kick all this stuff out into your into a folder, and you prepare it for After Effects. You get ready for it. So in the In the second part of this video here, I'm going to do the After Effects part where we bring it all in. We do a quick edit of the scenes. We put them all together. We do a composite, and then we render the final thing out in After Effects. So head on back. I'll see you in part 2 real soon, and I'll see you there. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you, everybody. Bye.